Casual Magic has been brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can get cool stuff. Use the code CASUAL for 5% off your order. We're also sponsored by Quiver Time, makers of the Quiver and Bolt deck cases and other fine card-holding accessories. Use the code CASUAL on their site for 10% off your purchase. And by Architect, a deck hosting website that doesn't sell anything, but they like me and I like them, so kindly use them for all your deck list needs. Now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to Casual Magic, the show where we talk about the fun side of Magic the Gathering. My name is Shivam, and Casual Magic is brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., Architect, and Quiver. Today, I am doing a show that is very different from my normal shows, but I'm having somebody really cool on. Magic content, like data analyst, I don't know, just numbers junkie, Sierkovitz has joined me today. Now, normally you'd find him on like limited resources once a set, giving you like breakdown on draft data and like spreadsheets and just like percentages of how many times did you win with Vorinclex in your hand and crawling counterpart on the table or whatever. It's not my flavor of Magic at all, but I am absolutely fascinated by things like 17 lands and the existence of just like data analytics and Magic. So I thought it would be really cool to talk to him. And so how's it going, man? Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. On the flip side of this, I'm not into your type of Magic, and still I somehow listen to every episode of Casual Magic, which, by the way, for this episode only should be changed to Causal Magic. It's just a flip of letters, but it will fit my theme much better.
I love it. So you work on 17 lands, right?
I work with 17 lands, so I'm not
With
doing
17.
I'm not doing anything with they are magicians. They do things I don't understand. I get the data, I can analyze it. They do all the coding and all the extracting the data.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Can you explain what it is briefly?
so 17 lands is just an aggregator of draft data, basically. So everyone that has Arena can install 17 lands if they play on the computer. It cannot
Yeah.
work on the mobile, unfortunately, to my despair. But you can install it on your computer, and every draft you play, it will log everything that you have. And after that, you have access to stats. You can actually rewatch a replay of every single game that you played ever, which is so
That's
cool that you
amazing.
can just go to the game that you played 2 years ago in some other format and just, wow, I did this thing. So that's quite brilliant. But apart from that, they also like really good in sharing data with the community, and
Mm,
that's where I'm parasiting on them. I leech on this data, I get it, I analyze it, I interpret it, and basically try to figure out how draft systems work and figure out, there's like lots of talks on. If you listen to all the episodes of Limited Resources, there's talk of heuristics and
mm.
there are those rules of engagement, and I just realized at some stage that you can calculate those things and maybe come up with answers. Are those heuristics worth anything, or are there some new ones that we don't know yet? And yeah, that's
That's
where I
so
try to make
cool.
my niche.
I mean, I think that's totally fascinating because draft is one of my favorite ways to play Magic. Draft and sealed are like the things I do that are not commander related. That's where I go to relax when I'm tired of talking about commander all the time. Um, but it's wild to see how draft has evolved over the years from back in the day when we were young and it was just like draft bread, bombs, removal, and other letters. And then into more like building a heuristics setup and like the quadrant theory that LR promulgated and this whole notion of like how you're supposed to draft, what you're supposed to like prioritize, what cards do. And we were using kind of intuition, right? Like you're like, oh, if we get in this format, it looks like low drops are good. So just kind of scoop up low drops, or this one leads itself more to control. And you can like, if you draw with like concentration or divination, it's good. So maybe go like M14 super slow draft. But that was all kind of just off of like almost just intuition and just like very loose data. Like this worked for me, maybe it'll work for you. But it feels like when 17 lands dropped and when you guys started and when you started putting out like your analysis and people started actually looking at this and understanding, it's crazy to me how much draft kind of like almost exponentially changed in terms of just what we understand for it. In like when I can look at a card and like look at Vorinclex and see how many times somebody had it in their hand versus like on play. Like, how many times did you win when you played Vorinclex? Just having raw numbers and percentages and then aggregated over tens of thousands of players, that's like the kind of data that Wizards of the Coast used to desperately try to hide from us, right?
Uh,
Like,
uh, yeah, I think that's exactly. I don't think that they tried to hide it. I just think that they didn't have enough resources to release it to us. That's more or less the thing.
yeah,
That's my guess.
well, I mean, because it felt to me for a long time like, we used to get lists from WotC of like, here's the 5-0 like decks that won whatever the draft or the modern event or the standard event, and then like MTG Goldfish or something would take them all, aggregate them, and give us kind of an idea of what's going on. Like, these are the good decks, and then Wizards kind of cut that feed somewhere, and they're like, oh, you guys are solving these draft formats or these standard formats too quickly. We need you to stretch it for a few more months. So do you know how they've reacted to the existence of, like, this kind of hard data that we get now?
I mean, I don't have any official statement. I know that a bunch of people from WotC do listen to my stuff, and they told me that it was nice. So,
Well, we take it. Because I'm guessing that they probably have access to very similar tools than that 17 Lands does, if not more detailed. Um,
yeah, they
it's
have all the games if they want to. I'm sure that they log everything because that's
Oh,
what
yeah,
logs are for.
100%. How many times did somebody draft this one specific, card, like, in the 38th slot of the entire draft or whatever, I'm sure they could get that kind of, like, granularity. I don't know necessarily why they would, but, um the thing though I found really fascinating, because I remember when Marshall and LSV first started talking about the idea of having really data driven, like, limited, I was very scared, because I'm like, oh no, if this becomes like, if I have to use spreadsheets to start paying attention, I'm gonna be screwed. Um, because like, I'm one of those draft by feel guys. I'm like, oh look, I'm going to follow the signpost uncommons that they give me, and if the deck doesn't work out, the next time I'm just going to try to draft a different one, and then eventually I'm going to just figure out what's going on. Now it feels like I can look at this stuff and say like, "Oh, day 3 of the draft, everybody has done all the things. What's actually working?" But it really bugs me when they make signposts and comments that fail,
I
like, that
know.
suck, right?
I,
Like,
I I'm getting very annoyed by that because I'm a data guy, but that doesn't mean that I don't like to figure out stuff by my own. I mean, the
yeah,
whole shtick that I try to do is showing with data when people are just like going into this kind of mass panic kind of drafting mode and they force things unnecessarily because someone told them that, oh, this
yeah,
is a great color combination. Where I enter is like, oh, that clearly must be wrong. There must be some other solutions to that. And I try to figure out, you know, my favorite format of all time,
mm,
and mind that I restarted in Dominaria, so I didn't play like all the Magic history because I retired at Champions of Kamigawa from my first Magic
I'm
stint.
gonna ask you about your background in a minute, but tell me your
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
story.
So as Ikoria, and I think in Ikoria I had something like 35 trophies, and then I looked through them.
Wow.
One of those trophies was cycling, and then rest was insane archetypes like reverse mutate. That was like one of my favorite inventions. I was yeah,
What?
reverse mutate. So you basically in the mutate decks normally you had to play like early creatures and then you mutate on top of them. My
Yeah.
plan was to play mana dorks and quickly ramp to 6 mana, play this hexproof thing, the Terran,
Yes.
I think it was. Play the Terran and then Voltron on Terran completely. So the
I
plan
love
was not to
everything about
mutate
this.
until, yeah, I thought that you might. And of course, like companion rule was just such a great thing for draft with the original version that you didn't have to pay because the
Mm,
cost in limited is real. Like you can't just make an
yeah.
Umori deck. You pay some kind of value. But if you can have Umori every time on turn 4, that's brilliant.
Yes.
And yeah, I
Like,
love that format for exactly not for that you can follow with the data, but you can just play by the ear and you can jazz about it, and that's great.
yeah, Ikoria was one of my favorite formats too, just because I love Mutate. I loved the feeling of the way those decks would ramp. And you're right, I think companions were fantastic in limited specifically. Nowhere else, but in limited they were amazing. And the cycling deck was cute, but it was always overdrafted. So I'm like,
Yeah,
well, I guess I'm going to be playing like Nethroy, and let's just go to crazy Mutate Town. I had Dave Humphreys on, and I was talking to him a few weeks ago, and he was like, "Look, man, we overshot on the cycling deck, but the mutate decks really worked and were really fun." And I'm like, they absolutely were. Um, yeah, like, because I remember when I was like first getting back into Magic and drafting, and it was like I think during Ravnica is when I really started drafting during Return to Ravnica. So like in Gate Crash, there was this like schoolyard myth where you should take Madcap skills. Everybody should draft Madcap skills first. It's the best card. That's like a red enchantment that gives like +3/+0 and menace or something. And I was like, all right, I'm going to draft like 12 of these. I didn't know what to put them on, how to use them, when to use them. I just knew if they're in my deck, I'm going to win. Turns out that's not true. It turns out you actually need to know how to do this. So when you're looking at these kind of numbers, if you look at like week one of, I don't know, Urza's or Phyrexia or whatever, how do you look at this and how do you take this data and make it into something that you can tell someone and give them actionable advice off of that? Because like looking at these raw numbers is very difficult.
Yeah, it's not the most friendly thing. I did it for a long time, so I have my pipelines of doing things. Like first week, I have to say, like first week data is very important because that's how format is being built. But for me, the first week data is usually boring because what you get is only those tables that are on 17 lens available for everyone, and that's the only
Mm.
data that you get. So like a win rate of a card, ALSA, which is the important thing, how late does the card go in a pack normally, and
What does ALSA mean?
average last seen as. And it means
Oh,
that on average, when do you see the card last? So for example, if you have like a bomb, like a Wanderer, let's say, everyone will first pick it. So you only
mm,
see it as the first card in your pack because you see it, you pick it, and then you never pass it. So you will never
right.
see it. Alsa becomes higher. Like with Alsa 6 or so, the card has like 50% chance of wheeling. With Alsa like 8, those are the cards that no one wants. That's sort of like dredges and
Mm,
so basically, you have this number, you have the win rates, and what I usually do is I sort of calculate from ALSA and the win percentage, how many good cards do you see in each archetype? Because I have the win rates, I have the ALSA. From ALSA, I can see how many of the cards will be in the average pod and how many cards you will see because of the ALSA, and I calculate this kind of number. And from that, you can see which archetypes are the most open because it takes into
mm,
account the strength of the cards. Because obviously, I only look at the cards that have a win rate of like over 56% or something,
sure.
so above average. And then I look at how many of them you will see because, of course, the ones that go late, you will see more of them per pod because you will see like half of them, and the ones that are picked early, you may
Right.
see quarter of them that are opened. And on average, you will see 2.4 every common per pod and stuff like that.
Wow. Like, literally just that sentence blew my mind for a second because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, duh, if you see, like, green card just showing up as the 8th pick in every like, 8th, ninth, 10th pick, maybe people are not taking green cards, maybe you shouldn't be taking green cards," and I was just like, "Oh my god, I get it now." It's like having the world open to me. Um, but yeah, man, nothing makes me angrier, though, than when Wizards puts out a format and gives you clear guidelines of this is a thing you should drafting. This is a mechanic that we've built into this set. And then you do that and you're like, all right, I did everything you wanted. I got all the bombs. I got all the cards in this color scheme. I played them. This deck sucks. And then you're like, what?
Or even
Why?
worse, it comes together once every 100 drafts, and that's the saddest moment
Oh
because
yeah.
it gives you that hope, but
Mm,
you rarely will play more than 100 drafts, so you will never see that deck completely open, and that's the
right.
saddest moment because you will try to chase this dream.
I call that the secret plans, draft. It's like when you're in cons and you're like the first time you figure out, oh no, secret plans is the most amazing morph card ever, and then just draft 5 color everything, and then you realize everybody else has also figured that out, and then your draft is just garbage, and the whole format is now the worst format
Mm. I
or
think
that
that
stupid.
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that like Kaltheim was a perfect example of the format. Also, like because you told me about the data solves everything very early, and I think that Kaltheim is a perfect example of that not being completely true. It's just
Mm,
like data can show you what's happening right now, but it very easily can change just because people will adjust their pick orders very slightly. So in Kaltheim, initially it was all about like multicolor snow. And you could just draw multicolor snow, draft multicolor snow. The snowlands were wheeling all the time, so you didn't have to pick them early. And for the first 2 weeks, I did it, and it was like great because I had like those 5 color decks that were full of nonsense. Everything was playable. But then I saw that like after 2 weeks, people started picking Snowlands too high, and all of a sudden you had to pick Snowlands early. And if you pick Snowlands early, you can't get those powerful cards uh,
yeah.
to fuel those decks. So you have like a deck with good mana and rubbish cards. So that's not a great combination because yeah, you can cast everything, but it doesn't make any impact.
Yeah.
So
Woo.
so we had like this
Congratulations.
amazing rise of aggro, and all the Naya decks, all the red white and green white aggro decks were just amazing at that time.
Hmm.
And then that would lasted for some time, and like people were playing like 17 Battlefield Raptors or whatever that card was called, the 1/2 first strike flyers. And then it changed because at the end of the format, actually the secret best deck was the Black Green Elves because it was atrociously open all the time. It
I
was
was
really
gonna say, I'm
powerful.
like, I was gonna say, like, I hated the fact that Black Green Elves was such a bad deck in that format. I kept
It
trying to
was
make it work, and it just would not.
it was
It wouldn't.
absolutely phenomenal at the end of the format. I mean, you get like pick seven black green multicolor cards. You can get the Tyver like pick six or something,
Yeah, seriously.
and those drafts you were going so well. Like I had decks with like four King Harolds and it's just it's insane because you play an aggro deck and at the same time you attack with King Harold. They double block it. It dies. You play another one. You pick a Finn out of it because why not? Then you play like something you play the King Harold's Revenge, the thing that gets plus X for the number of creatures you control, which you had probably 7 on board right now on Finn, and it has Death Touch, Trample, and is an 8/9 now. Deal with it.
It makes me so happy that that worked finally, 'cause that was the dream I wanted to live. I love playing Black Green Elves,
I'll
but
go through my 17 lens. I'll send you some deck lists of the elves from the late, so that
Kaldheim
you
was one of my
can
favorite
regret it.
formats, hands down. I loved Kaldheim
Mm.
so much. Um, so we'll get back to data for a second, but I want to know about you. How did you get into, like, what do you do? Like, do you do data analysis as a day job? Like, is this something
I'm a
you?
scientist. I'm
Oh,
literally a research scientist. I study microbial community dynamics. So basically, look at the societies of bacteria and see what makes those societies work and why they don't work sometimes, and how to make them work better in the context of producing renewable energy. So that's what I
I
do.
should introduce you to Tappy Toe Claus. She does a
Oh
lot of
no, I did
microbial stuff.
introduce to her myself, and we know that we're both microbiologists and we know what we do. So yeah, we're good. We're good.
Turns out there's a lot of random microbiologists in Magic the Gathering. That's very cool. So then I guess you are very used to just looking at large data sets of numbers and then trying to figure out what they actually do.
Yeah, you can say that again. Like because normally when people study communities in microbiology, they will say we study communities. There's like 3 strains of bacteria inside, and we see what happens. My communities, they have like between 500 and 2,000 species inside,
Oh,
and
jeez.
I never can grow them in individual. I just see them in bulk in this mush. I only extract DNA, and I can recognize them only with the DNA that I sequence. So yeah,
Oh, jeez.
big data sets.
That sounds like when I used to read a lot of research about people who were doing like studies on sourdough, on the growth of yeasts in sourdough for localities to understand, like, does this community's like yeast
I, th-
colony
I think
grow?
I might know the guy you're talking about actually.
You probably know better than I do. I'm just interested in bread.
Oh
So,
yeah, yeah, no.
um,
But I know a couple of biggest groups that study sourdough microbiome because that's very similar to what I'm doing. So we collaborate. I meet them on conferences, and
I love
yeah,
it. It's fantastic.
they have a much better thing because I work on poo, they work on sourdough. Who is going to get better pictures for their
It turns
presentations?
out your test samples are edible at least, right?
Mine
Like,
also are technically edible, but I wouldn't recommend it. Everything is edible. Some things just only once.
I'm gonna leave that one there. Oh my god. My goodness. Okay, let's talk about magic instead. How did you find the game? Where are you
I,
from?
I'm from Poland.
Cool.
Yeah,
I'm
so
not.
no, you're not. I know where you're from. You're from California.
I
You're from Massachusetts originally,
well,
and then you moved to California, or is
wow,
it?
you do listen. Goddamn. No, I'm actually from California. Then I moved to Massachusetts. Then I
Okay,
came back.
okay, okay, okay. So
Tech
half right,
jobs. Yeah.
half. But
But yeah. So how did you find the game?
so I was 16, I want to say,
Mm,
and maybe 15, and we went for like I was in a bilingual Polish German school. So we had
cool.
exchange with Germany for high school, and I went
Mm,
to Dortmund, I think, to visit the German counterparts. They came to visit us later, and we went to a random shop with my friend, and I saw cards, and I looked at them, and I don't know how, but I knew that this is the game I want to play. It seemed to have everything because I always play cards like normal cards with my
Mm,
grandfather, and I played bridge with my parents. So I liked cards, but I also was like deeply invested in fantasy, but never in games in terms of fun. I mean, I played role playing, and of course all, all
sure.
all all kinds of 90 ninety
There
six probably Baldur's Gate deep.
Yeah, there were a lot of I know there were a lot of, like, Dragonlance novels translated into Polish and, like,
Hmm.
a lot of Forgotten Realms books
I
translated
had the
because
lot.
yeah, so do I.
I was
Um,
more of a Pratchett person, but
it's weird. Part of having the largest Dragonlance collection in the world means that I had at one point the biggest collection of foreign language Dragonlance books, which meant I had hundreds of Polish novels in my house alongside German, Japanese, French, Russian, and then my wife was like, "You know what? I know you can speak a lot of languages, but you have like 12 copies of each of these books. You don't need that." And I'm like, "I
do
you
I?
make a good point."
I mean, I think I have some Dragonlance novels from that time in my collection.
Yeah,
I had the Polish first printing of the Game of Thrones. That was pretty nice.
that's pretty
Now they
cool.
are going for like crazy because that's the first edition. So
Yeah,
obviously,
that's really neat. So, were those cards in German?
no, they were in English actually. So that was, I mean, I was always more of an English speaker than the German speaker. To be
Mm,
fair,
yeah,
I do speak some German still till today. But
cool.
no, I just like bought it with my friend from high school, and we started playing. 7-6 worm. Wow, that thing is busted. And then
It's
of course
unbeatable. How can you
yeah.
destroy it?
So I wanted to keep it as my hobby because I was always like trying to do something, and then my brother started doing it, and then I started doing something, and then my brother started doing it. And I said, okay, this I'll keep because he was not as good at English, so I assumed that maybe he won't follow me. He was much younger, so like a year and a half, no, 2 years and a half younger. So I thought, okay, he won't follow me to this one. So I started playing those cards and completely casual. Obviously, 2 weeks after I came back, he started playing, which was which was a disappointed, but in hindsight, it was great because we started playing against each other, and
Yeah,
then
exactly. You always have somebody to play against.
and then at certain stage of my so-called career, that became quite important because we really were both seriously testing and like
Oh, did you try to do competitive play?
oh I did deep competitive play. I went to pro tour. I
Oh,
I made like I. I want to say I did top 16 of a GP twice, but no, I was 17th twice. So I can't say
no.
that. I can't say that. But
Lost out
yeah,
on tiebreakers.
I mean, I humble brag. I had the highest composite in Europe for some time in
Oh,
terms
that's
of
hella cool.
ranking.
I had no idea.
Yeah, I had over 2,000 composite in the old money DCI rankings. So yeah,
Wow. So, okay, so you have bona fides then. You've actually played this game at a very high level.
yeah. But in the times when the high level was not as high as it is right now. I mean,
Yeah.
I see the difference by comparison. I mean, especially
Do
in limited, we were just like dancing in the dark then.
we were babies in limited back then compared to this. It's like the idea of a mana curve was just cool and special. And now it's just like if you're not getting this card on the third pick of your second pack, you lost already. So give up.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
do you think that like someone like Kai Budo would be able to handle like being at this kind of being at the level he was at then against the competitive crowd we have now?
um, that fun story. My brother lost a win in for a GP top eight with Kai Buda in the good old days. Um, I mean, no one could win with him then, so
Yep.
I have to clearly say, it's very hard to say because I would want to compare with the modern Kai Buda, who is not as invested. I think
Right.
that if he would sit down and actually want to win as badly as he did in those days, he would have a good chance of being in lots of top eights, but I don't think
Yeah.
he would be able to do the same thing. So I think that the equivalent, for me at least, the equivalent of Kai Buda today is Jean-Emmanuel Deprat.
Mm,
He's brilliant, but even with his brilliance, they will not always find a deck that no one else knows because the information spreads just so much
yeah.
better. So you lose those kind of edges. So I
Yeah.
think that play
It's much
wise,
harder to find a
yeah,
Maverick deck now.
yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, you're right though, because like, I remember like if whenever Kai or John Finkel or somebody decides that they want to be in the top 8, they're in the top 8, right? Like they just like,
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go to Sunday this weekend. It's just like, okay, well, you're just better. I guess at some point, just being able to also play Magic in regardless of what your deck is, just knowing how to play against your opponent is good enough to be able to carry you because those guys are just like masterful people readers.
Oh
You
yeah.
know,
Yeah, no, I mean that's the part I never had. I mean, I was never a great player. I was like good in getting information, and that was my strength because
mm.
I was early on the internet and I figured things out. And you know, I read this Moshevitz articles on the dojo about the limited and which cards are good, and you know that was such a boost. Like I was like a genius compared to the others because I had the brain of Zvi in my head.
Oh my god, dude. I drafted against V once. I was playing Eric Klug had a Pro Tour cube that he made of all the decks at one Pro Tour,
Yeah.
and I got to draft it once. And I was sitting against V and I was playing against him. And mind you, I am not a Pro Tour player. I'm like a good drafter, but I've like never seen any of these like decks before. And I just grabbed cards that I thought were cool looking or whatever. And Zvi is looking at me like, your deck is miserable and terrible. What are you doing? And he's like, just show me your hand. And I'm like, okay, here. And he's like, I won the Pro Tour with this card and this card and this card. Looking at your hand, I can see that you're going to lose in 3 turns. GG's. And I'm like, oh, stick my hand out, shake it. Okay, well, you
So
win, I guess.
I
He's
met Zvi only once, and that was when I went to the Pro Tour in 2001. And he is a personality. I mean, he was so
mm,
the energy level was just insane. I was playing against a Japanese player, and then he was sitting next and just making some ridiculous random comments that neither me nor the Japanese guy understood what was going on, but he clearly had a plan.
Zvi is very intense. He is very intense, and he's very good at Magic. And he's better than me. Let's just put it that way. I'm like, I'm not gonna beat Zvi in a game, no matter. Especially when like half the deck I'm playing is like a bastard version of his Pro Tour deck. I'm like, okay, you're just obviously know how to do this better than I do.
I mean, his deck was the solution, wasn't it?
You know, his decks were weird, and they win. So like, I guess that's all
When
that
he
matters.
plays them, I think that these are the kind
Yeah.
of decks that it's like Sam Black, obviously. So
Yes.
people try to emulate Sam Black's draft style, but you need to have the Sam Black play skills to emulate
Yeah. Right.
Sam Black's draft decks because otherwise you're just going to you lose those tiny edges, and then just turn out that it's just one
it's
turn too slow.
It's funny you mentioned that because I remember there was a time when people would be watching like LSV Cube, and LSV would be like, "I'm going to draft a storm deck," and he goes off and he makes it. He gets all these cards that are otherwise just piles of garbage, and knows how to sequence them, makes them into an amazing storm deck, and just like wins the cube draft, and it makes it look easy. And then you go to do your vintage cube, and you're like, "I'm going to draft a storm deck just like he did," only storm cards are completely unplayable if you don't know how to play storm. And then you look at it and you've got this handful of random ramp that goes nowhere, and you're like, I don't know how do I work this to win? And then you realize the genius of someone like LSV. You're like, oh, you actually can draft a pile of garbage and make it win. I can't. I need to have my like cabs theory and stuff and my like creatures that are actually on the table. This is why I stick to drafting like, Craterhoof. I know what Craterhoof does.
That's a good card, you know. It does things. It does things. And then you don't rump to nothing, you rump to something. And that something is pretty
Yes,
substantial.
exactly. Like, I know where I'm going. I have an end in mind, and it's going to punch you. Or you look like Ben Stark, who's Ben Stark's drafting style is just the most haphazard and chaotic looking mess. And then he comes and wins, and you're like, I don't. How did you take a bunch of like 4 colors of trash commons and somehow put together like a 3-0 deck? I don't understand what you're doing. He's like, stay open until the very end. I'm like, no, you can't do that. Like, I don't know how to play that way. And even data doesn't help you try to solve that kind of problem. Maybe
I
it does if
mean,
you know how to
I
read it.
actually, I actually dabbled in trying to see how open you should stay in the format, and obviously it's difficult because the best decks that you will draft are the decks where you stayed true to the first color you picked, and it was open like crazy, and you just have a busted deck. These are the best draft decks. That's why in the week one it's so important to know what is open, because if you know
Mm.
that like in one, red green was very open in the beginning. It just could force red green, no problem, for the first 2 3 weeks of the format, and you would have busted decks because no one else was. And I actually figured out why, because I did calculations,
Hit me.
and it was because you know 17 lands users are a big group, but they
Mm,
are still maybe 10% of all the players in the drafts and arena. But there is the 90% that are not 17 lens users, and the
right.
non 17 lens users were forcing bloody poison decks. And because of that, red green was over, because everyone wanted to feel the thrill of killing someone with poison.
It's the new hotness. You want to try it out, right? Like it makes sense. Just from an emotional standpoint, like, look, every card is toxic. I want to try this. I've never gotten to play with. I wasn't around during Scars of Mirrodin or whatever. Let me try to win with poison.
That
And they get it out of the system. And now it's like,
fair.
okay, let's try to play real magic.
It's fair, but I figured it out because I noticed that like white had very powerful cards, but they were very highly drafted. Red had
Yeah.
very powerful cards, but they were going really like wheeling all the time.
Yeah.
Then black had not so good cards, but it was still much higher drafted than red. And then what made me realize what was going on is I looked at green, and green was sort of like in between. Some cards were drafted highly, some cards were not drafted
Mm.
highly, but all of the ones that had toxic on them were drafted highly. So there's my answer. The people were just forcing toxic decks, and they tried to make them happen.
The- I would deny that, but it's true, and I did try to make it happen. But I love playing. I mean, Green White Toxic is a super fun deck for me to play. I enjoy that a
Played
lot.
in standard now.
Yeah, I know. I just like Corrupt. I think it's really cool. Um, so what do you think have been like the most balanced formats recently? Like the ones where you could
Ooh.
play in the 10th week and still enjoy it, you know?
That I think that
Or are those two different
we
questions?
weirdly these are two different questions, because I can tell you that there are formats that I could play into week 10, and Ikoria would be, but was not necessarily the most balanced.
That's fair.
Zenith Flare being the main culprit. I think that if it was a rare, it would have been a better format.
Yeah.
I don't think the card shouldn't exist. I think it should have been a rare, possibly.
Yeah.
But I would draft it forever, because for me it was balanced, because I did madness. Like I made a Yorion as a companion vigilance deck also.
Yorion and limited. That must have been nutty. Like, for instance, like Lutri was a real cost. Like having to play blue red and have Singleton in limited is like that's very specific, you know.
Mm.
But I enjoyed playing like
Yeah,
Giganta a
I
lot.
never managed. I don't even have a Lutri in my. I have all the companions except for Lutri and Zerda, and I need to get them. But I have a box of Ikoria that I still need to open. So yes.
Zerda is
Um,
busted. Zerda has
Zerda
a
and
lot of infinite
Brushwhack. That
combo.
was a great limited combination. Zerda and Brushwhack.
Yes, that's awesome. Um,
But so that's one type, and there were very balanced sets that were actually maybe not beloved by people. Like
hmm.
Crimson Vow was actually quite balanced. I think that Midnight Hunt was quite balanced in terms of color powers.
Midnight
Uh,
Hunt was just which one was the one where everybody just draft blue black zombies all the time? Was that Midnight Hunt?
yeah, it was Midnight Hunt, but that was only first 2 weeks, because late
Hmm.
it was again the situation when in the beginning people just didn't want to draft them. As the format cleared, all of the other things became open, and you could like actually blue black was not the most powerful deck even by the end of it. It was actually blue white and blue green. They were quite powerful, more powerful than the blue black,
I must have
because
stopped playing then.
exactly, this is the thing that people that are can I call you a filthy casual? Given the name of the
Yes,
podcast, probably that's the right description. They stop
that's
after two
fair.
weeks, and then you only get the sort of
Grinders.
grinders, but you also got those infrequent casuals, the ones that don't even wait for the new format to come out as something special. They just like randomly decide to play a draft in the middle of the format, and that's who you get in the middle of the format, basically.
I would say that thinking in my head, the drafts that I've played the most in the past year or so, Kamigawa, I drafted until the last possible second they would let me, and I would probably still be drafting it today if they let me. Capenna, I played for like a week and was just like, I don't care, this is stupid. You get run over in that deck, and it's just like this is not fun. I played a lot of Dominaria. Dominaria United was hell of a fun draft. Urza's, I really enjoyed it, and then I think I just got wrecked by one too many Platinum Angels, and then I was like,
Oh,
fine.
yeah, those games are not fun when you have like a platinum angel and you just realize that you don't have an answer for it. But
Yeah,
actually,
it's like,
Brothers War was a great set. I think it had like a lot
It
of.
was a lot of fun, I think.
If you could draft all those Citadel Stalwart decks and have 5 colors and lots of unearthed and cheap stuff, and they were brilliant. That was fun. But I think that honestly, I don't think, maybe with like Baldur's Gate exception, I don't remember a bad format in the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Capenna was a bad format. Don't tell
Capenna
me
was
Capenna
misunderstood.
wasn't.
I'm going to. This is the hill I'm dying on. Capenna was There was too many content creators that said that Capenna is a 2-color format, and I think it wasn't. It was a perfectly serviceable 3-color format, but you just needed to prioritize fixing early, and then
Mm.
while you pick the fixing in the first pack, you sort of wait to see what's open, and then you decide on your colors. And you had 3-color decks that were super powerful and super coherent. There was a bit of a color imbalance problem with the Riveteers not being as good as the Brokers, obviously, but you, I was like most of the second part of the format just drafting Grixis decks, and they were fun and they were amazing, and you played all the Corpse Appraisers, and because they
Just
were going
Bant.
late.
Bant was look. Bant is my favorite color combination, and I play the hell out of white and green and stuff. But that was just unfairly busted. That stupid Bant thing
Some
that just put
common,
counters on
yeah.
everything all the time. I'm like, come on, this
Oh
is
yeah,
garbage.
Broker's Ascendancy,
Yeah,
yeah.
broker's ascendancy, broken ascendancy, right? Like, uh, okay. So here's a very specific question for you. So in Phyrexia All Will Be One. One of the things I've heard that I don't understand is that people suggest we should be drafting Prophetic Prism a lot. Like Prophetic
Yeah,
Prism, the color filter that draws you a card when it comes to play. Can you explain to me why this card is good?
I can. It's not good. It's actually it's actually like, if you look at the data, it's one of the biggest traps in the format, because it will be good in like very 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 specific decks, and very few of them actually.
Mm,
Probably like if you have first picked Atraxa or something, then you
sure.
might think about Prophetic Prisms. But actually, when you look at the data, this is the card that is most overplayed of all the cards in the format, compared to the results that it brings. So yeah,
I believe it, man. I was never a believer in that card, and I'm like, this is not a
no.
good card. I don't know what you guys are doing, but everybody's like, "Oh, I'm playing Prophetic Prism and drawing cards." I'm like, "Yeah, I can do that with a Skull Bomb too. That's
Yeah, but
fine."
you're playing Prophetic Prism and drawing a card while the other guy is bashing your face with Crawling Chorus, and you're already
Right?
corrupted, and soon you're going to be dead because they're going to play something that will give it flying and whatever.
Okay, I need to tell you because I think you would appreciate the dumbest deck I've ever played against. There was a guy who I was playing against who had Axiom Engraver, which is the looter. I mean, not the looter, it's like the rummager, right? The
Yeah,
remove
yeah.
an oil counter, discard a card, draw a card. He had 5 of them. And I was
Mm.
like, "Why do you need 5 of this card? Like, it's free, okay, whatever." And what I didn't realize is that this dude was playing, like, 4-color hot mess garbage, but the whole point was discard all your cards until you get a Traxa, throw a Traxa away, and then bring it back with that black, Raised
But
Dead,
I do like the fact that he had 5 Axiom Engravers and an Atraxa, which uses all the colors except for red.
right? And I'm like, this is a plan. I respect it. And like the fact that they pulled it off and like destroyed me with the Traxa, I'm like, well, you know what, man? Props. You managed to find the dream of ridiculousness and make it work.
Yeah, I'm still sad I never managed to open a Atraxa in the draft format, because I would definitely, if I opened it pack one, I would go for it and try to make it work.
Yeah, because it seems just like if it's gonna. I mean, you might as well, right? Like, if you can live the dream, do something ridiculous and enjoy that.
That's how
I don't know.
many of my gems were lost.
I look at drafting as a gem negative experience that I just enjoy. I know I'm not going to win a ton of gems. I'm just here because I like to draft, and then I place enough standard to get gold to draft again, and then we call it good. Um, it's kind of like movies. I go to a movie to watch for a couple hours, not to expect a return on my investment. I draft for a couple hours and know that I'm throwing money away. That's fine. Like the money can go to whoever wins the arena open. It's not going to be me. um, what do you think? Like when you go back to like thinking about the data and stuff, and just the idea of all these. Like I love first off that the fact that the site's called 17 lands makes me laugh because it's like, look, there's the ultimate heuristic right there. 17 and 23. That's the first
One of my first
baseline thing.
analysis I did with their data was actually showing that 16 lens is better for that particular format.
I love that. I love
It
that a
was
lot.
for one format. Yeah, I mean, generally 17 lens is a very good heuristic.
Yeah, but it just that still just makes me laugh, like, the idea of, like, um, when you look at this kind of data, like, it's wild how different, like, we were talking about this earlier, it's wild how much differenter, how much more advanced the idea of this kind of data is for us. Like, even having just a small percentage of the player base drafting this, it's still enough to be able to formulate a good idea on how to build your, like, view of the draft. Because I know when I listen to, like, LR or whatever, and they talk about, "Yeah, this is the number 1 card in 17 lands," and I just sit there, I'm like, yeah, it was, because 'cause I've seen a ton of that in play from, I can't expect everybody everywhere is using 17 lands, but the aggregate of how the populace plays ends up kind of, like, lining up with this data. Have you seen times where the data has been, like, a weird outlier for 17 lands versus what you see in the actual field?
Well, I mean, the example with the
Oh, I guess the
forcing
toxic
of the
example,
toxic,
right?
that's a good example where 17 lens users did something very different than the rest of the population. The fact that in this first week you see a color pair open and 17 lands players jump on that. I mean, famously, LSV I think drafted 17 lands or 20 drafts in a row, blue black and Midnight Hunt because it was so open. Obviously, he knew it from 17 lands. But if it's open, it means that the rest of the population doesn't know it. So by proxy, they don't know it and they let it pass, and
Yeah.
people get like 12 pick good blue removal or 12 pick good black creature, and all of a sudden everyone can get that deck if they are on a pod with majority non 17 lens users. So yeah, there's definitely plenty of that.
Do you prefer best of 1 or best of 3?
Ooh, I play mainly best of one. It's
Mm,
cleaner and quicker, and I very rarely have time to properly sit down and think.
yeah.
But I do like best of three as an idea. I always play in my FNMs, and then we always play best of three, obviously.
Mm.
Um, I'm currently writing an article trying to grade the best sideboard cards in Limited in the last 2 years,
Oh,
to
man.
basically look at what makes a good cardboard sideboard card. So I'm looking into best of three data as well. But yeah, just time stops me from playing best of three on. And it's also the fact that you get to Mythic is important. If it was ranked best of three, maybe I would dabble in it
Yeah,
more.
that's weird to me that best of 3 is not ranked. Like, you would think that all the pros who wanna do this wanna be best of 3, because that's what, like, the finals of the PT and the arena opens and all these things are. So, like,
Yeah,
I don't know,
it's. I
that's a
think
WotC
that the
problem, I guess.
Wizards always claimed that it was actually on players' demand, and it was actually the invest players that wanted it not to be ranked because they wanted to have a format where they can hose the suckers and basically win their gems for free by not playing ranked.
Yeah, but, is there have you noticed any, like, distinct difference in the way people draft BO1 versus best of
Oh
3?
yeah, there's big difference. So it's a weird paradox. Oh, it's not a paradox. It's a illusionary paradox. But draft
Mm,
level on best of three is higher, but play level in best of three is lower.
hmm,
So if you go to best of three, your pods will be more tight, and there will be more people that know what they're doing in the draft. There will be more people that are 17 lens users on those drafts, but the average opponent will be weaker because, of course, you're not getting part within your rank.
right.
So you will get, if you have like gold, platinum, and diamond and mythic arena players in best of three, you might be the mythic one. You're going to play the gold one. So obviously, the stronger you are, the weaker your opponents will be. And obviously, the weaker you are in best of three, the stronger your opponents will be on average.
Hmm.
And in best of one, the pods are very loose. And I think I calculated that they are roughly 2 weeks behind the best of three in terms of knowing what's going on in the format, roughly. Uh, you can see
That is such a
basically when the cards reach the same level of being picked, and it's like a 2 week lag between best of one and best of three. But
that's
of course,
really
the
interesting.
opponents will be quite strong because you were going to play with people from your rank most of the time, so they will be
Sure.
your ability.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense just because the pools are smaller to pull from for people you play against in best of 3.
Mm.
And I don't know, I mean, I think that the introduction of all these like modal cards that Wizards has done to give you like sideboard cards that you can then main draft makes playing best of one just even more attractive because then you can have like your random artifact destruction on top of like a direct damage spell or something like a braid or whatever. And it just becomes something you can play and have a reason to play without. In the olden days, you put a sideboard deck in your opening deck, and you put a sideboard card into your opening deck. You're just going to end up screwed once in a while
Mm.
when you draw this anti-flyer spell or something.
It's also like there's like no colors when there like in every color there will be something good from artifacts and enchantments. So this enchant will always be technically playable. It's just like in
Mm,
some formats it's going to be main deckable, in some formats it's more of a sideboard card. But you
yeah,
can start playing those cards, and again you can use data to see in which formats you can use it more.
yeah. I mean, it's weird because like I rely on your type of analysis because I look at like when I go to 17 land or whatever, and I just see like columns of numbers, and I'm like, I don't know how to deal with this. So I really appreciate having someone like you actually sit down and translate this into like understandability for me. Um, because like I want to draft too. I want to enjoy myself. I'm just not ahead for numbers. I'm an English major. So like when I look at this stuff, it's fascinating to me. It's super fun to see and it's super fun to understand like what people are drafting and like where they're picking random cards, but it's also just like what the how do you take this into actionable data? Like knowing that
Mm.
something is the most first picked common is it's interesting, but is that like useful? Like
I think
I
that
don't know.
like the most actionable piece of data for a beginner is going to be knowing which commons are good
Hmm.
and which commons are bad and which commons are secret gold cards. And I think that
Mm,
those three things, if you know them, you're going to go much further in drafts. Because like in format like one, there was lots of those secret gold cards that I called.
right.
Like for example, Eye of Malcator, that was a card that was only really playable in blue white. And in the
Yes.
other colors, it was markedly worse. That's the 3 mana artifact that scries 2 when it enters the battlefield, and whenever an artifact comes into play, it turns
It
into a
turns into a
4/4.
4/4 or something.
Yeah, this card was great in blue white and terrible in every other color combination. And knowing that is already like one thing that puts you ahead. You know that if you play blue white, you can play it, and you should also know that in other colors you probably want to avoid playing it. And I think that like the biggest in terms of drafting, because of course like lots of the win rate in draft comes from play, and I'm not analyzing those data because they're just a pain to analyze. They exist,
Yeah.
but I mean there's just absolute pain.
Yes.
um it's just that people put too many of those mediocre cards in their decks because they maybe durdle too much during the draft, and they end up with like some like cards 17 to 23 are just very bad. And then you have the games when you draw out of your 6 spells that you drew in the whole game, 4 of them were those cards from that 17-23
Oh
bracket,
god.
and you're just going to lose those games because your cards do not much, really. You want to
Yeah.
be sure that your 23rd card is a solid playable, and that will skyrocket anyone's win rate in draft, basically. And
Yeah, and the
17
other
lands,
thing
you know which cards are those, so you can
yeah,
identify which cards are on your want list and which cards are not, and then basically that's quite
yes.
easy to memorize.
And the other thing is to be disciplined and not play like 45 cards in your deck or 43 cards and actually try to stick to the 40 card minimum because it's getting a lot harder now to actually cut cards out of your decks because they
Yeah,
all look playable. They all look like, oh, they all do something there because Wizards doesn't give us just trash cards anymore that don't do anything, or
you
there's
know,
like
I
one or two weathered power stones or whatever. But
I
it's
drafted
hard to make those
Stronghold,
last
so you
cuts,
know
right?
I know the bad draft formats or something.
Man, but yeah, I don't know. It just I don't know. I really enjoy this. I really enjoy this kind of like um how man, I've spent like 15 minutes talking to you and I haven't actually asked you about what it's like to sit down and try to do this stuff. Um how do you present your data to people? How do you get this out to folks? Do you like write articles
It's
or
yeah. So I do like every week I do a seminar, and I do it like proper seminar. So I made a PowerPoint presentation, I put it on Twitch, and I talk for an hour or two about one topic. Every week it's a different topic. So for example, last week I was annoyed by people calling one a fast format, so I did like I made it into sort of like a detective case on is it a fast format or is it not? And then I use data to answer that question to solve clues. And from each clue, I went to a bit deeper, and managed to show that the format is
Man, that
fast,
sounds
but it's not like fast in Amonkhet, meaning when you just was one person was attacking, the other one was attacking, and they never met. It's a
yeah,
fast format that you can prepare yourself for, and if you prepare yourself for that format, you can actually stop that speed, and you can lead to a board stall. And in the board stall, obviously, you are going to overcome the board stall with big things, and therefore this is a format where you want to have this kind of a U-shaped mana curve where you have like a bunch of ones and twos, not much in between, and then fives and sixes to finish the game.
yeah.
And that's one example. I mean, I will sometimes make like analysis of every archetype and which cards are important for it, just to get people on track when the format is starting. Sometimes I will basically try to have an old heuristic and try to find data to show if it's true or not, and how is it true, and in which cases it might not be true. So,
Hmm.
for example, I did those big analyses when I looked at, is spending a bit more mana than your opponent winning games? And then I just
Mm.
basically took the data from the gameplay. I calculated how much mana people spent in the game and how much their opponents spent. And I
Oh,
calculated like win rates. And it's a perfect graph because you see that you have basically 50% win rate when you're spending even. And then as soon as you spend one more, it jumps to 52 and 54. And it depends, of course, which turn you overspend them on and stuff like that. But you can calculate all of this, and you have this perfect graph that shows that actually every mana that you spend, assuming that you spend it on something important, no, re-equipping the same equipment 5 times in your turn just to spend mana doesn't count as that. um
but yeah. So if you have 4 mana, instead of dropping the 3 drop, you drop 2 2 drops, and it's going to be better on average.
yeah, if you have a 3 drop, or you can spend 2 2 drops, on average you're going to be better off by using all the mana, because then maybe you draw another 2 drop and you can drop a 3 drop and a 2 drop next turn, so you give yourself better
Mm.
outs. Or maybe you draw a prophetic prism because someone misinformed you about it.
I
um
hate that card. It's so stupid. Uh,
I know. I always didn't like it, and I think that I never understood why it was so good because I didn't play in the original printing, and then
yeah,
maybe it was good. But I last 2 times it was released, I didn't like it at all, and I thought it was like do nothing.
yeah. It's fine. It's a rock. It's like it's not even a good mono rock. It just
No,
filters. Like
no.
if you're playing three
It
colors,
counters,
okay, fine, play it. But like,
card draw is an important ability. But so, for example, I sometimes try to figure out my own heuristics. And just to give you an example, I looked at the data on how people draft, and I told you about this ALSA number when people pick some cards. But of course,
yeah,
the ALSA is calculated across all 3 packs. So I tried to look at it, looking at pack one, pack two, and pack three, and people draft slightly differently. So what I found,
hmm,
and that's very consistent across other formats, is that in pack one, people are very high on drafting the signpost uncommons, for example. Like they will
sure,
pick them much earlier than in pack two and in pack three. They go later, the later the draft. But it's completely the opposite for fixing. Fixing goes quite late in first pack, but then
yeah.
it almost never goes late in pack three, because what happens is that people draft those crazy decks, and then in pack three they realize, fixing, what am I going to do, how am I going to cast all this rubbish, I need lands, and they just start first picking lands. So actually, when you're smart, you're picking your fixing first when it's open, and then
Hmm.
you're picking your nice side points at commons in pack three, because then no one is interested in them, because they're scrambling for lands, and if you already have the lands, well,
I
you're
mean,
gonna get all the gravy.
it's funny you say that because that is pretty clearly what my cube drafting strategy tends to be. When I draft cubes and stuff, I always prioritize like the moxes or the dual lands or the fetches or whatever the fixing of the thing is, because I'm like, I can cast whatever I want to cast later, but I want to be able to cast it. And if I can't, if I start drafting all these big mega cards, and then at the end I'm just left with like, the devil's mana base of 6 6 and 6 basic lands, I'm not gonna win. So I definitely prioritize, and it's good to see the data actually bears out that like be able to play your cards and then pick all the cool cards to play later. It
So
just
I
seems
have I have two responses to that. So like first, this is the strategy you should have used in Streets of New Capenna, and you would have enjoyed the format much more. Because that's what exactly what I did. I picked the fixing early because I you can play you could play basically almost in every draft a 999 mana base if you count all
Mm,
the triple lens, double lens, and everything. You could have a 999 mana base without a problem just by picking five non basics. Um,
mm,
and then you were so open that you could just pick between archetypes based on what was open and what was being passed. So that was like a better strategy for Streets of New Capenna. If it ever comes back, try to draft it like this, and you will see that it's very different format because you don't have to decide on your color combination early because those lens were so flexible that you can even flip between
yeah.
the wedges as you were drafting. And second, I told you that I was almost in top 16 of two GPs. My first one was like literally my first GP that I played, and we came to Prague. I actually didn't want to go. My brother just dragged me along, and I opened my pool, and it was it Odyssey? I think it must have been Odyssey, because I had a pool that was absolute rubbish, but it had three bombs. The problem was that one of them was Aboshan, the Cephalid Emperor,
Oh, geez.
that requires three blue to activate the ability. The other one was Cable Patriarch, which has three black in its casting cost. And the third bomb was the White Wrath that cost two white, and it killed everything and made 2/1/1, I think, tokens or something. And I squeezed them all in with the 6/6/6 mana base. And
Whoa.
I
Oh,
just like, if I had a Boshan, I drew three islands. If I had Cabal Patriarch, I drew three swamps. And if I had the Wrath, I drew two plains. And that was my whole secret of going to day two.
just draw good.
Yep. I think I went 7/1/1 on day one without a problem with this atrocious mana base because those cards were so good. And if you played them, you were just golden. And
Yeah,
that's how limited was played in those days. I mean,
man. Abotion was a busted card too. That
it
thing's like
was.
the ability would just like tap all the
Yeah,
creatures or
this was
something.
set there. Tap everything for three blue mana. Yeah.
That's disgusting, man. That card was nutter butters. That format was stupid. It's just old Magic was very different. There's a lot of weird cards back then.
I
Man,
mean,
this is gonna be
you're a commander player. You probably prey on those kind of cards.
I live for those. I live for these busted cards from sets that nobody remembers anymore that are just like, this card is heinous and it's amazing here. Like, like if I can find the one home for a card that was utter garbage anywhere else, it is like, you know, gold is raining from the sky. It's amazing. All right. So if you were going to tell a new player who is trying to approach draft and trying to use his data to actually learn something, what do you think? How should they approach their first pack? How should they look at this and or even this data and try to use it to become a better drafter? Like what should you be focusing on learning?
Are we talking about someone that never drafted before?
No, let's say like somebody who's like they draft during pre-release and they want to just try to get a little bit better on the ranks. They've been
Mm.
enjoying themselves, so they know how to draft. But it's just like they want to try to move into like limited resources, like tier of drafting. Like
I would say, yeah. Like first thing, don't use it during the draft. Like there is a very good reason why 17 lens doesn't have like any kind of overlay, at least not an
mm,
official one for the draft, because the whole philosophy of it is generating data, sharing data, and using data to better yourself as a sort of learning tool rather than as a draft aid.
right.
So I think that the best thing is to just go onto this card performance tab and filter those cards by commons and look at all the commons and see the ones that have over 56% win rate and carefully look at each one of them and think, why is this a good card? Because everything that has 56% and more of game in hand opening game in hand win rate. So that before we go into that, there are different win rates. There's gameplay win rate and there's game opening hand win rate and game in hand win rate. So
Right.
games played win rate is when the card is in your deck. How high is the win rate of the card? Now the problem with that metric is that you draw a card only in like 40 to 50% of the games. So 50% of that win data is based on the games when you didn't even see the card. So it tells you something more about how strong are the decks that the card is in than about the card itself. Then you have like opening hand win rate, which is a good metric for aggressive cards because aggressive cards will have a high opening hand win rate because that only counts when you had it in your first seven cards.
Mm,
And then there is a game in hand win rate, which means that at any stage of the game you had this card in your hand. And this is like the best measurement of pure card power because you exclude those 60% of the games when you didn't draw the card. You only look at the ones
huh.
when you had it. so it had some impact on the game. So the signal of the card power is much stronger in this metric. So if you want to look at individual cards, it's very good to look at this one. There you learn which cards are the most powerful.
That's fascinating. Okay, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, game and deck, that's not a really good heuristic. Okay, yeah, you
Mm.
draft it, it's in your deck, who cares? But
Like some
actually,
cards are literally piggyback on power of the color combinations, are not good cards but have a high gameplay win rate because all the other cards in the color are busted, and sometimes you play this thing. So yeah.
yeah, exactly. But like actually being in your hand means it has a chance to have being
Mm.
played and then impacting the actual game. Um, I because yeah, like I've been looking at 17 lands for a bit, practicing for this, and I'm just like, I don't know what these things mean. Like I understood what like in your opening hand win rate is. That's very clean, right? Like it's you drew it, now you play it. Like there's nothing worse than when you crack open like three bombs in your sealed deck and then you never draw them and you lose every game. Yeah, it's great. It was like, Shieldred is in your deck. If it doesn't hit play, you're not going to win with it, right? But having it in hand at some point means at some point you've had the chance to play it, which means that it can show you just how stupid that card is. Um, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So
so I would go to the 17lands.com, go to the card performance
what
tab.
the hell? Okay, so hang on a second. Hang on a second. I'm looking at 17 lands. I did that exact thing, and the first thing I saw when I went to the card analysis and I just hit games in hand win rate, Nissa has a 66.7% win rate. Nissa
Yep.
costs 7. How is what the
It
hell?
can cost 5.
I guess it can cost 5, sure, but also like if you had told me that that was like the winningest card in this format, I would not have believed that.
Mm,
That's
it, it's a classic card that if you get the 7 mana and you play it, you probably won because you
I guess
probably
that's
have four
true.
forests, and the overrun with +1 extra is usually what will end the game. So that's, I think,
That's fair.
the thing. It's also worth noting that Nissa isn't. If you don't draw the Nissa, your deck is not going to win much, basically. So that's a problem.
That's true. Um,
But those cards make sense because you have like Nissa, Miglos, Shieldred, Eternal Wonder. But of course,
yeah,
looking at the data like this, like you just did, sort them by game and win rate is useful to know, but it's not really what will make you a better drafter because drafts are
commons
won
and
on
uncommons.
commons and uncommons. So if you just click on commons in the rarity
Mm,
tab, there is a rarity deck drop down, and you can click common, and then you will see the best common, Contagious Vorak.
yes.
And then the second best common, and this is something that maybe if you're a new player you wouldn't have known, is Chimney Rabble, the 4 mana 3/3 haste, and when it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 red Phyrexian Goblin creature token. That's ex aequo the best common of the format.
Yeah,
And
I
would you
think so.
expect that if you saw the spoiler? Because I wouldn't.
No, I wouldn't have. I would have thought it was some like toxic thing or something in white or, something like that. But honestly, my favorite class of cards is guy who brings a friend. So I was
Mhm.
always overvaluing Chimney Raffle because I just like, look, when you have two cards instead of one card, you're gonna win more. It just
Yeah, but
and I'm
if you look at it like, what would you say that it was a 4 mana 4/4 haste? That would be a good card, no?
yeah, that'd be pretty solid.
This is probably
But
better because three of the power is hasty, and it brings two bodies, and two bodies is, as you said, good.
yeah, it turns out having more cardboard on the table. I mean, I think that was one of the first lessons I ever learned from like Michael Flores or whatever. Is like if you have more cardboard than the other player does, you're going to win more games of Magic, right? Like
Well,
that's
and
just the bottom line.
look at the cards like Contagious Vorak. It draws you a land, so that's more cardboard for you. Chimney Rebel
Yeah.
makes a 1/1. Hexgold Slash. It kills things that are very expensive for very cheap.
Yes.
Barb Butterfist, 2 pieces of cardboard. Basilica Shepherd, 3 pieces of cardboard. Crawling Chorus,
Exactly.
2 pieces of cardboard. Indoctrination Attendant, 2 pieces of cardboard. Furthest
Yeah.
Strider, well, hasty big thing. That's
Yeah.
that. We,
And then you
we, we
get back
stop
to
it
like
there.
just bodies, right? But yeah, like it's nice that sometimes your old classic standard understanding just still works. If you have more things than they do, you're going to overwhelm them and win. Uh, it's just a matter of is this a fast, a slow, a controlly, a mid range? But that's the sort of thing that you got to play to find out. Um, Thank you so much for joining me. This has been really cool. I've been a big fan of yours for a long time. I really appreciate the analysis and insight you do because translating this stuff into common magic language is a incredibly valuable tool, especially for people like me who can't look at data like this and understand what the hell is actually going on. So I really appreciate the work that you do. It, and I mean, the idea that 17 lands exist at all is really cool. I should send them a note of thank you too. Uh, but we have hit our time, and I have to go and actually go grab my kid from school. So with that in
School run is
mind,
important.
you there's there's little worse than like miss being late to pick up your kid. Let me tell you. Um, but with that in mind, though, if people wanted to find you or see your analysis or come to your Twitch seminars, which sounds amazing and I need to do now, like I was gonna say, that sounds like another full-time job, my dude. Like actually putting on like a weekly class to with a PowerPoint and everything. That's pretty
Don't,
wild.
don't tell me. I mean, I know exactly. And like some analysis I did took me 20 hours. So
Jesus Christ.
and that's for and for a 2-hour seminar that maybe 50 people watched at that stage. So
You put these on
it's
YouTube?
I do put them on YouTube now. Yeah.
Good.
So they're on
Like
Twitch on.
for posterity.
Yeah, they're on Twitch. They're also in the audio version for the brave ones that want to listen to numbers. But yeah, okay. So where you can find me is every Thursday at around this time, so 2 Pacific. I stream my seminars on Twitch at Twitch
Mm,
Sierkovitz. I later put them on YouTube at YouTube Sierkovitz. I also have a podcast called Magic Numbers. Look at the name.
fair.
Yeah, I just celebrated episode 69, so it's smooth sailing
Nice.
from now. Um,
I was not gonna
and
do that.
yeah, I'm also on Twitter under Sierkovitz. I'm everywhere under Sierkovitz. I try to do. And yeah, what I also want to say is that 17 Lands is a very important member of the Magic community. I think that apart from Scryfall, the two best tools for Magic players, and I don't know your Commander tools because I never played Commander, I have to say. I know that there are some very important and cool tools for Commander, but I mean, from the Magic that I know, Scryfall and 17 Lands are the best tools. Therefore, I highly encourage, if people have some money, to support Patreon of 17 Lands and basically be nice with them, because I know that the creator of 17 Lands paid from his own pocket for a couple of months recently to run it, the service that we all use, which I found a bit sad. So be nice to
Yeah.
them.
I think if I was going to talk about the three most important resources we have in just Magic's web sphere, it would be like Scryfall, which is obviously the
Sierkovitz,
most
that's a good
important
one. That's a good.
tool.
No, continue. Sierkovitz is good.
Well, I said Scryfall is like literally the number one thing that we all use. 17 lands is incredibly valuable for the spike year, the draft year, the people who want to understand this. And then EDH Rec, which is the other half, which is the commander version of like our database and stuff like that.
I
And there's
actually
like,
used it.
wow,
Even I
really?
used it because I tried to maybe make a death touch deck of some sorts. Don't judge me.
If you ever need help with an EDH deck, I know a guy. But those I think are the three pillars of kind of like our community, like just neutral resources. Like not like they're not trying to sell you anything or bias or anything. These are just resources that give you information and then people help you figure out what to do with them. And I think those three are very much worth supporting because Wizards does not do enough for us. If we're going to do it ourselves, we need to help each other actually do these things. But
That
man,
I
thank you
agree
so
with.
much.
Thank you so
I
much. I mean, it's such a pleasure to be with you. And you know, I always listen to you, but I mean, watching your face as you talk is just so much more enjoyable. I have to start watching your episodes on YouTube. It's
It's very kind of you to say, man. Like, I don't know, it was funny because the first time I heard you, I think, like, LR Limited Resources had me on as a guest to talk about, like, drafting, one of the, like, Commander Legends or whatever, and I'm like, "I'm the most casual scrub in the world. What am I doing on Limited Resources?" And then, like, a few weeks later or something, I saw one of your first episodes. I'm like, "Wow, this is definitely what the listeners of Limited Resources want, not me."
you know that the most popular episodes are the probably the ones when they go back to the old sets and talk with Ben Sack, and I also
Yes.
listen to them. Especially,
Those
I'm
are my
waiting for the next
favorites.
one. Next one is Tempest, my first set that I was playing. But I mean, luckily, limited resources audience is very broad, so
Yes.
they take all kinds.
Yeah. Anyways, my friends, you can find me at Gearbury Gears. You can find the show anywhere podcasts are sold, or at Cool Stuff Inc. on Tuesdays, or at YouTube on Tuesdays now as well. Thank you to my editor, EK. And remember, my friends, it is not magic without the gathering, and we will see you next time.